All right, so today we're diving into a really fascinating story from the chemical solutions provider Megachem. See, their full year 2025 results present this classic business paradox. They sold less stuff, but somehow they earned a whole lot more. Now, from an investor's point of view, that's a story you really want to understand. Ben, let's get into it. You got it, Alex. And this slide, this is the whole puzzle right here. On the left, you see revenue is down 3.4%. But then you look to the right, adjusted net profit is up by a staggering 31.1%. So the big question we're going to answer today is, how on earth did they pull that off? Exactly. And, to get to that answer, we first have to wrap our heads around the really challenging market Megachem was dealing with. So let's start with the story behind that dip in sales. Okay, so let's look at the hard numbers. Revenue dropped from about 129 million Singapore dollars down to 124 million. And it's worth pointing out that in their biggest market, the ASEAN region, that drop was even sharper, down 8.3%. So yeah, this was definitely not just a minor blip. And this quote from the managing director, Mr. Sidney Chu, really puts it all into perspective, right? He's basically saying, hey, this wasn't just a Megachem problem. The entire chemical industry was getting hit with these major headwinds. Everything from too much supply to messy trade situations, which just drove down demand and prices for everybody. Right, and we're not talking about small hurdles here. This was like a perfect storm of outside pressures. You've got global economic jitters, China's recovery being kind of sluggish, that industry-wide oversupply Ben just mentioned, which of course leads to lower prices, and then top it all off with more barriers to global trade. Just a really tough environment. Okay, so that's the gloomy part of the story. But here's where it gets interesting. Despite all of that, the profit side of things tells a completely different story, one of some pretty incredible resilience. And this is the number that just pops right off the page, a 31.1% jump in adjusted net profit after tax. That works out to a solid 3.9 million Singapore dollars for the year. That's a really powerful sign of how strong the underlying business is. Now, that word adjusted is super important here. You might recall that Megachem had a major warehouse fire back in 2023. So the 2024 numbers were skewed by a bunch of one-time costs from that. By adjusting for those, we get a much cleaner sort of apples-to-apples comparison of how the core business is really doing, which, naturally leads you to ask, okay, a great profit number is one thing, but from an investor's viewpoint, you want to know if the company's foundation is actually solid. How do they manage to stay so financially healthy through all of this? Yeah, and to figure that out, we've got to look at something called the net gearing ratio. Now, before Alex shows us the number, let me just break it down real simple for you. Basically, it measures how much debt a company has compared to its shareholders' equity. All you need to know is the lower the number, the more financially stable the company is. And a Megachem's number? It's just 0.34 times.
That's an incredibly healthy number, Alex. It tells you Megachem isn't drowning in debt. They have a really strong, stable balance sheet, and that gives them the room to breathe during tough times, and more importantly, to invest in their future.
And here's another piece of evidence that shows just how confident they are. They actually proposed a dividend of 1 cent per share for the year. And let's be honest, companies don't hand out cash to shareholders unless they feel pretty good about their financial stability. And that confidence isn't just talk, right? They're putting their money where their mouth is. We mentioned that fire earlier. Well, now let's talk about how they're turning that disaster into a massive strategic play, an $18 million bet on their own future. So here's how that's playing out. The fire was back in July 2023. All through 2025, they've been rebuilding, and the plan is to have this brand new state-of-the-art warehouse up and running by the end of March 2026. Look, the key thing to understand here is that they're not just rebuilding what they lost. This $18 million project is a massive upgrade. We're talking about a 60 to 80% boost in capacity, which means they'll save money by not using third-party storage. It's also being built to much higher safety standards. And maybe most importantly, it really solidifies their claim of being a one-stop shop for their customers. It's a real long-term power move. Okay, so we've got the performance story and this big strategic investment. So what's next? Let's take a look at the road ahead for 2026 and beyond. Well, the company's being pretty realistic about the challenges. They're looking at some serious potential risks on the global stage. You've got nagging inflation, rising geopolitical tensions, even worries that the AI bubble could burst and cause ripples everywhere. Throw in shaky job markets and those trade issues that won't go away, and it's pretty clear 2026 is going to be another tricky year. So, with all that uncertainty floating around, what's the game plan? How is Megachem planning to navigate all of these potential risks? Well, their strategy is pretty straightforward and consistent. They're doubling down on what they know works, a resilient business model that's all about their customers and is firmly planted in the Asian market. And that Asia-centric strategy, it makes a ton of sense when you look at this. I mean, if you just take China, ASEAN, and India, you're looking at the part of the world that's responsible for about half of all global manufacturing. Megachem is already established there, which puts them smack in the middle of the action. Okay, we have definitely covered a lot of ground. So let's bring it all home and just boil it down to the absolute key takeaways for anyone looking at this company. What's the bottom line here for an investor? I think it comes down to 5 main things. First, they showed they can be incredibly resilient, right? They pulled out a strong profit even when sales were down. Second, their financial house is in order, thanks to that very low debt. Third point, they're not just playing defense, they're playing offense with that $18 million strategic investment in the new warehouse. And fourth, their whole strategy is perfectly in sync with where global manufacturing is actually happening in Asia. And that last one is a big one for any investor. Those global economic risks are very real, and they are definitely something to keep a close eye on. Which really leaves us with this final big question. We know Megachem is resilient, but as this huge new warehouse comes online in what's shaping up to be another challenging year, will that resilience finally translate into actual sales growth? That, I think, is the story to watch in 2026. This content is intended to serve strictly and only as an informational, independent, objective summary of recent events and should in no way be interpreted, construed, or relied upon by any party as inside information or financial advice.